Well, good evening. Nice to be with you again today. I'm going to try to see. There we go. Yes, very good. Hello, everybody. It's good to be with you tonight. Happy, what is this? Today is the Sunday of the Samaritan Woman. So we have one more Sunday in the season of Pascha, and that will be the one of the young man born blind. And then in the middle of that week, we will have the Feast of the Ascension. And then after the Ascension, we have 10 days, and then we go to Pentecost. So it's good to be with you, everybody. Good evening. I'm happy to see. Hi, Linda. Hello, Nancy. It's good to see you online. So why don't we start with prayer, and then we will continue our discussion. And like always, if you have any questions, send me a text, or you can put something in the quick chat, a live chat on the side. Either way is great. And we'll just continue on. All right. So in the name of the Father, and of the Son, and of the Holy Spirit, one God, amen. Christ is risen from the dead, trampling down death by death, and upon those in the tombs bestowing life. Christ is risen from the dead, trampling down death by death, and upon those in the tombs bestowing life. Christ is risen from the dead, trampling down death by death, and upon those in the tombs bestowing life. Our Father, who art in heaven, hallowed be thy name. Thy kingdom come, thy will be done on earth as it is in heaven. Give us this day our daily bread, and forgive us our trespasses, as we forgive those who trespass against us. And lead us not into temptation, but deliver us from evil. For thine is the kingdom, and the power, and the glory of the Father, and of the Son, and of the Holy Spirit, now and ever, and unto ages of ages. Amen. Again, Christ is risen. Get to say that for another 10 days or so. So here we are. Tonight we are going to do our continuing Bible study on the book of Ecclesiastes in the Old Testament. And so if you are able to follow along in an Orthodox study Bible with the Old and New Testament in it, that one is, you can find this particular, we're going to do chapters 5 and 6 today. And so you can find that on page 874 of the Orthodox Study Bible, the one with the Old Testament, not just the New Testament and the Psalms. Ecclesiastes is an Old Testament book. It's an excellent book. Today it's very, very good. So I'm eager to do that with you. In addition to that, I'll talk. Someone had raised a question about the expulsion in Vespers, expulsion from paradise. I want to talk about that next week, or not next week, but the next session, because it's part of Vespers. So if that's okay, we will do that. Okay. So like I said, if you do have any questions or any comments, you can leave them in the live chat. Hello, John. Good to see you. And hello, Kathy, again. If you do have any questions, you can either send it through my cell phone, through a text. Don't call me, but through a text. Hi, Marilyn. Hi, Tom. Or you can just put it right there in the live chat. So without further delay, here is chapter 5. And again, feel free to interrupt me if you want. This is your time as well as it is mine. Chapter 5 of Ecclesiastes. Do not be hasty with your mouth, and do not let your heart be quick to utter a word before God. For God is in heaven, and you are on earth. Therefore, let your words be few. For a dream comes in a multitude of distractions, and the voice of a senseless man is with a multitude of words. And when you make a vow to God, do not delay to pay it, for his will is not in senseless men. So pay whatever you vowed. In fact, better not to vow than to vow and not pay. Oh, good. Hi, Jay. Okay. Wow. That even right there, I mean, that's very powerful. Okay. And let's just look at this, line by line. Now, the first thing, do not be hasty with your mouth. That is very good advice. It's wisdom. And do not let your heart be quick to utter a word before God. What do you think they're saying there? What do you think Solomon is saying? Well, one of the things that he's saying is that oftentimes we aren't very careful about what we say. And, especially in our culture today, I've said this before in church, but we are a word-saturated society, full of words. There are whole churches, not ours, thank God. There are whole churches that are just the word. That's it. I mean, imagine. There is a theologian by the name of Karl Barth. Some of you may know who he is. He died, 52 years ago. Karl Barth. He was very important in Protestant circles and helped to reform some things, good for him. But his statement was that when he goes to church, if the priest doesn't preach, or excuse me, not priest, if the pastor doesn't preach for an hour and a half, he feels like his time has been wasted. Can you imagine that? Can you imagine? Well, I mean, some of you probably could imagine me preaching an hour and a half. That's a lot of words, And sometimes I think that's just too many words. So I'm grateful that we're part of a church, thank God we're not like them. I'm not saying that, but I am saying that I am grateful that we are a people of word and sacrament, that, the words are important. When you read the scriptures, it's important. And hopefully some of the things that I do help to make the words understandable or applicable. But it is more important, I think, for us to be gathered in a communal experience, to receive the body and blood of Jesus Christ, to be a sacramental people that does confession and baptisms and marriages and things like that. All of these things involve a sacramentality, and that, I think, is equally important to whatever words there are. Sometimes I do think that we have too many words. So here, what he's saying, do not be hasty with your mouth. Think about the times when you hear somebody say something and then you immediately return like you're playing tennis. It's like a return volley. They shoot at you and then you just shoot right back, not carefully, but quickly. And just think about how oftentimes that creates more harm than good. So don't be hasty with your mouth, and let not your heart be quick to utter a word before God. God is in heaven and you are on earth. That's very profound, and it's very true. Therefore, let your words be few. Okay? Now, what's he saying there? I think in part, sometimes we can, try to hide behind our words. Sometimes we can try to create these scenes or, flowery images or something like that to make our words easier to take. God exists in eternity. God knows what you need before you even are aware of what your needs are. God knows every hair on your head. So he's going to know what you need as you start to pray. So a lot of times our words, hi, God, thank you. I did this today. I did that today. God knows these things. Okay. Now, in our prayers, we do tend to say things like, God, in your mercy, you healed the kinswoman of Peter of her fever. In like manner, O Lord, heal the person here before us who is sick. There's nothing wrong with that. Hearkening or calling to mind what has happened in the past and the way that God has shown his customary mercy, we can say, well, you showed your mercy there to, Peter's kinswoman, right? So show your same mercy, please, today. There's nothing wrong with that. But it does get kind of messy when you just sit there and pollute the air with words. Be succinct. There's one great prayer. You are God. I am not. Help me. Sometimes that's all we need to say. Therefore, let your words be few. For a dream comes in a multitude of distractions, and the voice of a senseless man is in a multitude of words. Also bear in mind, dreams. This is kind of complicated, but dreams are not really seen in a positive light in the Orthodox Church. Dreams tend to be a vision of Satan as far as the church is concerned. It's where the devil does all of his tempting. And sometimes we have good dreams, but the church generally says don't take much of what you see in your dreams into account when you do things. Now, granted, there are times when Joseph in the Old Testament had his dreams. He saw a famine that was coming. And so because of the dream that he had, he was able to prepare, like he was an interpreter of dreams, but he was able to prepare Egypt for a famine that was coming. And as a result, he gained favor in the eyes of Pharaoh and actually saved the whole people of Israel by bringing them to Egypt and taking care of them. So there are some times that dreams are of value, but for the most part, our dreams are distractions. Think about the kinds of dreams that we have, especially now in this time of the coronavirus. A lot of our dreams are vivid, and they have, or even lurid, and they have, these images that are disturbing and so forth. I mean, there have been newspaper articles about this. Well, that's the kind of dream that we're talking about. These dreams are not helpful to us when we are in prayer with God. And so it's better for us to put those things aside and to pray directly to God, being as succinct as we need. God, help me, help my family, help this city, help us get over COVID, help us whatever. I mean, just be succinct. Don't pollute the scene with needless words. When you make a vow to God, do not delay to pay it, for his will is not in senseless men. So pay whatever you have vowed. That, again, is very important. In the Old Testament and in the New Testament, it says very clearly, you let your yes be yes and let your no be no, especially when you're dealing with God. Okay? It's very important. And don't barter. Don't say, God, if you give me this, I'll go to church 5 weeks in a row. Don't do that. It's a bad idea. Okay? Instead, just let your yes be yes and let your no be no. Better not to vow than to vow and not pay. Because God will not put up with someone who is not willing to keep up their side of a bargain. Okay? How is it described? It's described as being a senseless man, someone who just does not have any common sense. Okay? Again, continue. I'm going to keep going, but please do not be afraid to text me or write a question if you have them. Okay? I'm going to keep moving. This is verse 5 of chapter 5. And again, Ecclesiastes, page 874 in the Orthodox Study Bible. Do not let your mouth cause your flesh to sin. And do not say in the presence of God, it was a mistake. Why should God be angry at your voice and destroy the work of your hands? For in a multitude of dreams there are vanities and many words, but you should fear God. This is, it just goes back to the theme that Solomon is saying within the text of this particular book. Our works, God's not going to destroy things, but those things will be destroyed, and we will be distraught because they're destroyed. And then we will pray, and God will say, well, see, this is what happens. I mean, that's kind of what we need to understand in all of this. The vanity is that a lot of things that we do don't take God into account at all. So why should we trouble God if those things really don't account with God? I mean, I see what he's saying. For a multitude of dreams there are vanities and many words, but you should fear God. We've talked about this before, and the fear of God is a troubling thing on one level, because when we get to the point of Christ's crucifixion and resurrection, the enmity that exists between us and God has been destroyed. Okay? There is no more distance between us and God. Only thing that happens now is that we might build obstacles to get in our way that keep us from God. But God, the pathway is open. It's there. Okay, so God's more of a friend than someone to be feared. Okay, but the fear does come because if the fruit of our hands is vain, if what we are doing has absolutely no bearing to our relationship to God or a relationship with other people, but just to spend time, to waste time, to take up time. And all those things are just, pointless. then when we do come face to face with God, we meet a God who has absolutely no interest in what we are doing. And in fact, might be annoyed, if that's the word. I mean, it's not the right word because that implies a human emotion unto God. But if our efforts are all towards our own vain pursuits, then we really stand to be condemned by God in the fact that our activities have absolutely nothing to do with him. Something very important to ponder. Okay, so that's verse 7. If you see the oppression of the poor and the violation of judgment and righteousness in the land, do not marvel at the matter. For there is a high official to watch over a high official, and higher ones over them. Moreover, the abundance of the earth is for all. Even a king depends on work in the field. And this is good. He who loves silver will not be satisfied with silver, nor he who loves the harvest with its abundance. This is also vanity. In the abundance of good things, they who eat them also increase. But what virtue does the other owner have from them except to see them with his eyes? Whether he eats little or much, but the abundance of, the sleep of a servant is sweet, whether he eats little or much, but the abundance of the rich will not permit him to sleep. There was a sickness I saw under the sun. Wealth kept its owner to his hurt. Worth kept for its owner is to his hurt. Let me say that again. Work kept for its owner to his hurt. Okay. So let's stop there and backtrack a little bit. All right. When we look at this, that is so powerful. He who loves silver will not be satisfied with silver. Look at our world. Okay. And look at these things, right? How many of you have a phone that's older than 10 years? Probably nobody. Could it even stand the technology that we have in terms of transmission? Probably not. So we continue. Those who have iPhones will not be satisfied with their iPhone. You know, there's already a new version, 2 new versions since mine. My gosh, I'm obsolete. You know, and that goes on. Cars, the same way. Houses, the same way. Computers, same way. Whatever. Clothing, the same way. All of these things have a shelf life. It's here today, it's gone tomorrow, and the desire becomes from more of what is. And that's sad. You know, granted, with technology and things like that, you have to keep up in terms of, the programs that are offered or the way that data is transmitted through the cell phones. You know, these things are important. But we will never be satisfied, he's saying, with just enough. We'll always want more. And that's exactly what commercials are for. If you already didn't have the innate desire to get more of what it is that you have, the commercials on television are specifically designed to get you to want what you do not need. Now, granted, there are a lot of pharmaceutical commercials now, but, even there, are you really sure that those commercials are for your benefit, or are they for the benefit of the company that could stand to gain a lot of money if you invest in that? So commercials are at the heart, really, of this kind of a thing. He who loves the harvest with its abundance. This is also vanity. In the abundance of good things, they who eat them also increase. But what virtue does the owner have from them except to see them with his eyes? The sleep of a servant is sweet, because servants labor all day. Whether he eats little or much, but the abundance of the rich will not permit him to sleep. Because when you're rich, you're going to be worried about preserving your riches. Think about it. If you have a lot to protect, you're going to worry about keeping it protected. If you have a lot to defend, you're going to have a lot of issues trying to defend it. Right? So a lot of times the simplicity of it all, he's implying here that it's better to be a servant. Better to be a servant where all your trouble is, I have to get up tomorrow morning and work. And so your sleep is undisturbed. Your sleep is sweet. But if you're wealthy, you have to worry, well, where are the robbers going to come tomorrow? Who's going to break in and steal? Who's going to protect me? Who's going to protect my wealth? Who's going to protect my family? All these kinds of questions come. That's why we have gated communities and things like that in this day and age. There was a sickness I saw under the sun, wealth kept for its owner to his hurt. The wealth shall perish in painful distraction, and he begets a son, but there is nothing in his hand. As he comes from his mother womb, naked shall he return to go as he came. He shall take nothing for his labor, that it may go with him in his hand. This is also a painful sickness, for as he came, so shall he go. And what is his gain for what he has labored for the wind? All his days are in darkness and sorrow, and in much anger, sickness, and gall. My goodness, not very happy. I don't know if any of you had this sense, but to me, just reading that, it reminds me of our funeral service. It reminds me of the time when the observer in the funeral service gazes in the tombs and sees that kings and beggars are the same, and that he can't tell the difference between a rich man and a poor man, because in the end, all return to dust. All are ashes and all are dust. We can't take our money. We can't say to God, hey, God, I was a trillionaire on earth, so I deserve a special place in heaven. In all likelihood, in fact, the special place in heaven will be reserved for Lazarus, and you can join the rich man in his place of suffering. So it's because these things create false gods. The pursuit of wealth creates a false god. You begin to depend on it more than you depend on God. You begin to want to protect yourself and arm yourself and fight against things around you, when in reality your generosity should be known around the land, and you should be doing the things that are pleasing to God and God alone. Okay, so it's difficult, okay, because we don't see it that way in this culture. We see our possessions as something that we've worked for and have earned and deserve, when in reality, all we truly deserve is the mercy that God decides to give us or not give us. Continuing on in chapter 5. Behold, I have seen good. It is a fine thing for a man to experience goodness in all his labor, in which he toils all the days of his life that God has given him, for it is his portion. As for every man to whom God has given wealth, possessions, and authority, to eat from it, to receive his portion, and to rejoice in his labor, this is a gift from God. For he will not remember the many days of his life, because God distracted him in the merriment of his heart. Now that's somewhat complicated, but it's a reminder that it's important for us to think that it's not their wealth that's going to condemn them, okay? It's not that at all. There are countless examples, scripturally and otherwise, that speak of wealthy people who out of their generosity gave, and they gave mercifully, okay? So it's not the wealth, it's the preoccupation with the wealth. It's the desire to put that wealth before other people. It's the desire to worship it in some way, shape, or form, okay? So in that regard, we need to be mindful of that. It doesn't mean that, Christ himself says at the time of the rich young ruler that it's harder to go through the eye of a camel to go through the eye of a needle than it is for a rich man to enter into the kingdom of heaven. And the reason why he said is this very thing, that if they are preoccupied with the preservation of that wealth, at all costs, and at the sacrifice of other people's lives, then they're going to be judged for that. Okay? So it's not a matter of just getting rid of all your wealth and doing other things. It's a matter of making sure that your priorities are straight in the midst of all of that, that you are being generous and merciful and kind and compassionate in the time when other people are in need. Okay? And so what Kohelet is saying here is a fine thing for a man to experience goodness in all his labor in which he toils all the days of his life that God has given him. Okay, it's okay to work. We have to remember that work for itself, though, is vanity. Work for God is the thing that matters. For as for every man to whom God has given wealth, possessions, and authority to eat from it, to receive his portion, and to rejoice in his labor, this is the gift from God. For he will not remember the many days of his life, because God distracted him in the merriment of his heart. Okay, so in there we see that work isn't just vain, but it can be vain if it's done for the wrong reasons. Okay, John, I see your comment. I'll comment on that. So we have a message. He says, some people are afraid of being too generous because they become vulnerable to be taken advantage of. I can see that. But to that, I would say, well, if you're giving something out of the generosity of your heart and you're doing it for God, you're not really doing it to be known by others. You're not really doing it to be seen as a generous person or a kind person. You're just doing it because it's the right thing to do. It shows your love for God. If you're doing that, then if someone takes advantage of you, that's not on you. It's on that person. And they will bear the judgment from God if they take advantage of you that way. Okay? I also think that sometimes we're afraid of being taken advantage of, and so we won't give it all. Well, that's not a good way to think. We do need to give and need to be generous. You know, there's a saying on Mount Athos that God does not judge twice. And so if the person has taken advantage of you, there's the one that bears the greater sin. When you're in heaven, when you're being judged, God will see your intention and know that it was given with a pure heart and with a desire to just show God that you love him, and God will judge you accordingly. He will not condemn you because it was a wasted gift, because the gift's intention was virtuous. Okay? That's an important distinction to keep in mind, right? It's not the gift itself that matters, it's the intention. All right? It's not the act that you do itself, it's the reason. Why did you do the thing? Why did you give the gift? If you gave it as a get out of hell free card, that's the wrong reason. I realize that's tough, but it's a very wrong reason to think that our good deeds are what saves us. That doesn't save us. Our good deeds aren't going to save us. What's going to save us is our love for God, our desire to be with God. That's what saves us. And because we are cleaving ourselves. I mean, think of us as like a branch that's kind of, flitting around in the wind. And finally, we get to tap into the source, into Christ himself, okay, who nourishes us and sustains us and guides us and loves us and has compassion on us and all of that, right? We're grafted onto that. When we're grafted onto that, there is life in abundance. Not from us. We are recipients of the mercy and the grace that comes from God, okay? But God alone, okay? So God gives us the grace to do the things that are sufficient. And then our activity, our fruit bearing, the beautiful things that we do, the beautiful labor that we have, that's all a reflection of God's love for us. And that's it. That's all there is. Okay? It is just merely an echo of the love that God has for us. If we're not echoing, then we don't necessarily love God. And that's the part that's hard to understand. Okay? We may just fear him, but we don't love him. Okay? If we loved him, we would be bold and go and love our neighbor and love God as we are supposed to, without fear and without the fear of being abused. If we're abused, know that thousands, millions of people were abused before us. Okay? Many people have suffered in the name of Jesus Christ. The cross is painful. Okay? So that's important. It's important to remember. All right? John, thank you for the question and thank you for the comment. If anyone does have any other questions or comments, please, again, feel free to text me or write. So, all right, we're going to continue on. We're sort of marching along pretty well here. So we'll go to chapter 6. In chapter 6, there is an evil I have seen under the sun, and it is abundant among men. A man to whom God shall give wealth, possessions, and glory, so he lacks nothing for his life from all the things he shall desire. Yet God does not give him power to eat of it, but a stranger consumes it. This is vanity and a grievous sickness. If a man begets 100 children, if he shall live many years, however many as the days of his years shall be, yet his soul is not filled with goodness, and he has no burial. I see that a miscarried child is better than he, for it came in futility and departs in darkness, and its name shall be covered with darkness. Though it has not seen the sun nor known anything, it has more rest than that man. Even if he lived 1,000 years twice, but has not seen goodness, do not all go to one place? Wow. So, again, it's in how we reflect God's love. It's in how we are the people called by God to be his ambassadors in this world. And so when he speaks about this, there is an evil which I have seen under the sun, and it is abundant among men. A man to whom God shall give wealth, possessions, and glory, so he lacks nothing for his life. From all the things he shall desire, yet God does not give him power to eat of it, but a stranger consumes it. This is vanity and a grievous sickness. It's very powerful. We need to be careful. We need to be careful that our lives are spent from our birth to our end of this life, that they are spent not in toil that is fruitless or pointless, but instead in things that bring glory to God. That is that's a terrible thing to consider. If a man begets 100 children, yet he shall live many years, however many as the days of the years shall be, yet his soul is not filled with goodness, and he also has no burial. I see that a miscarried child is better than he. Oh my, a miscarried child is better than he. Wow. That's tough. But we can see examples of this. Most of the time we can see it in the form of like a movie or a book, where we see somebody's life that is just, it begins in pointlessness and it ends in pointlessness. I think that's a great fear in our culture too, the fear of being abandoned or of nothingness. But we need to bear in mind, my brothers and sisters, that our existence is an existence in God, and that our image is God's image, and our likeness is that which we aspire to in God. It's important for us to remember that our lives are only filled with meaning when they are pointed towards Christ. And I think that's a very important point for us all to be mindful of. Our lives only have meaning when they are fully pointed towards our God, when they are in a living communication with us and God himself. That is vital, absolutely crucial. And so when you have somebody who does not have that, then his life is pointless. There is a movement, it's called nihilism. Nihilism basically says that nothing matters, that everything is irrelevant. And you can see where you can get something like that from Ecclesiastes. But Ecclesiastes is putting that against a distinction of being in God. Because it's true, all things without God, not beyond God, but all things without God, all pursuits without God are vanity. They're pointless. They have no meaning. They are nothing, which is what nihilism means, nothing. Right? But with God, it means everything. And so it really is better that a child that never even comes into the world would be better off than somebody who lives their life in a vain pursuit that's devoid of God. There's no meaning there. It's empty. It's as if there was no life, even though years were lived. What a horrible thing. So that's something that we need to ponder. Our lives need to be seen as in relation to our God. Right? All labor of man is for his mouth, and yet his soul is not satisfied. For what advantage does the skilled man have over the unskilled man, since even this poor man knows how to keep himself alive? Better is the sight of the eyes than the wandering of the soul. This also is vanity, and is the choice of one's own spirit. If anything has come to be, its name has already been used. And if it is known what man is, then he is unable to dispute with him, who is stronger than he. Since there are many words that multiply vanity, what advantage does man have? Again and again, it's this balance, this question, which way are you going to go? The way of light or the way of the dark? All the labor of a man is for his mouth, and yet his soul is not satisfied. We must nourish our souls. How are our souls nourished? They are nourished by doing things that are in accord with the will of God. Okay? They are not our five senses, not our physical senses, sight, smell, hearing, taste, and feel. Those are physical senses. They're not spiritual senses. And so we need to do what we can to feed our souls. All the labor of man is for his mouth. What that means is you labor, you work, you get food, you eat, you live, right? And yet his soul remains hungry. See? Your soul is fed. In fact, if you notice this morning, I don't know if you caught it, in addition to just this morning, well, no, I mean, he does talk about this, so let's just stay there. When Christ is talking about the food, right? Because he's already had his discussion with the Samaritan woman, and it's time for him to eat or something. And the disciples say, Rabbi, you need to eat. And he says to them in this mysterious tone, I have food which you do not know, right? And then he says, my food is to do the will of the Father. Well, what kind of food is that? That is not physical food. Physical food is a hot dog, okay? Physical food is a hamburger. Physical food is hummus, all right? Spiritual food is to do the will of the Father. Spiritual food is prayer, almsgiving, just giving a thanks to God. And you don't have to be flowery. You don't have to be profound. All you have to say is just thank you, God. And that's it. Good enough. Okay? So that's important point number one, right? That even though you may be skilled, if you do not have this balance between your physical skill and your desire to pray, then you're of no benefit. Okay? Vanity and the choice of one's spirit. You know, throughout all of this, there is this horrible kind of a shrug. And it's all vanity. It's all a vain pursuit. It's all a pointless enterprise. And it's all up to us. It's our choice, either to go after this vain enterprise or to go after something that really matters. Okay? For who knows what is good for a man in his life? All the days of his life which pass like a shadow are spent in vanity. Who can tell a man what will happen under the sun after he is gone? Short chapter, but a powerful one. Again, be very careful of vain exploits, vain enterprises, because they end up painful. Yeah. Very good. Does anyone have any questions about anything? Please feel free to ask me questions. You can text me. I love to get questions. All right, well, we're going to continue on here, okay, because we're just at, it's about 40 minutes in, so I think we can just keep pressing on if you don't mind. So we are now going to start with chapter 7 on page 876. It says in the caption, the value of wisdom. A good name is better than good olive oil, and the day of one's death than the day of one's birth. It is better go into the house of mourning than to go in the house of drinking. For this is the end of every man, and the living will take it to heart. Sorrow is better than laughter, for by a sad countenance the heart is made better. The heart of the wise is in the house of mourning. The heart of a senseless man is in the house of merriment. Oh my. Wow, look at that. Boy, did I open a can of worms there, didn't I? You know, it's funny. It's actually not that funny. But, you know, his point is an important point. And what he is saying is that a lot of times we are better prepared for what is to come next, our life in eternity. It is far better to go into these darker, deeper things than it is to just avoid them and just, you know, drink or, you know, seek merriment. Okay? So a good name is better than good olive oil, and the day of one's death is better than the day of one's birth. It is better to go into the house of mourning than to go into the house of drinking. And for this is the end of every man. Every man and woman ends up in a house of mourning, a funeral home. Everyone, you know, either the church or a funeral home or something to that effect. Everyone ends up there, right? And so we need to make sure that we, again, keep things in balance. We need to make sure that we have a healthy perspective about who we are and where we are going. And I realize that's just such a downer, I know, but at the same time, it makes perfect sense. You know, having a mindfulness of the end of it all. Yeah, I know, that's such a downer. But having a mindfulness of these things is going to help keep things in perspective when difficult times come. And this is something that I think we need to keep in mind, especially now during this time of isolation. You know, it's better for us to seek out after the things that are spiritually important and nourishing. You know, suffering is one of those things that I think our culture really hates. You know, it hates the idea of you know, people suffering, and so it tends to ignore it, or it tends to contextualize it and say, oh, it's not so bad, you know, you'll be fine, you know, that kind of thing. You know, and instead, I think we as Christians, again, we wear crosses, we wear these things. When we wear these things, we need to remember that there's a body on that cross. And that body on that cross is the one who saved everything. But that's the journey that we all partake of. We're all journeying in that way of the cross. Okay? And it's, you know, I mean, it's not like you can't have fun from time to time, but it's important to keep it under control. All right? And it's better to keep it in proper perspective. You know, if we do it in the sense like we, you know, we party up now so that we can get ready later, that's not a good idea. It's not a good idea at all. We should be ready. And then once we are ready, once our soul is in a place where it is in peace and not wrestling and not fighting and all of that, once our soul is calm and content, then we can do whatever we want, and we'll find joy and beauty and gladness and happiness and all sorts of things that don't necessarily mean we have to go to a house of merriment or you know, what's the other? Oh, a house of drinking. Yeah, I mean, that's kind of like credit. You know, credit is, I want to have fun now, but I'll pay for it later. Okay, and I think that's part of what's being said here. You know, be mindful of what's coming. If you can be mindful of what's coming, maybe that'll help keep things organized now so that you can find joy in good things and you can find time to be serious about others. And when suffering does come, you'll have the proper context and the proper lenses, if you will, the eyes to see or the heart to feel, or however you want to describe that. You will find yourself in a position where you're able to deal with the suffering that's being put in front of you in a way that doesn't lead to despair. Okay? This is what I perceive culturally, is that when we have hit our limit about, you know, our perceived suffering, I've had enough, I've been away long enough, it leads to one of two things: either flat out rebellion, saying, I'm not going to do this anymore, I'm going to go and do whatever it is that I want to do, which is destructive. Or, on the other hand, it will be leading to despair. It'll say, my life is pointless, their life is pointless, I give up. And it leads to depression and hopelessness. Okay, both of those are unhealthy. Okay, this is an opportunity for stillness. Okay, and to cease our busyness so that we can focus on God and what truly matters. Yes, we can do that. Okay, but we have to have the spiritual senses to be able to do that. We have to have a desire to be with God. We have to have a desire to be willing to put those things to the side and just deal with what's important in our lives. What's important in our lives are the things that draw us nearer to God and his kingdom. Okay? And so even here, it is better to go to a house of mourning and to see the depth of a life and the end of a life than it is to ignore it and drink and be debaucherous and say, well, I'm going to do this for now and have fun now, and then I'll suffer later. Okay? Your balance will come in a much more healthy way. It'll come in a much more healthy way if you keep your sights steadfastly focused on the things that really matter. And our being entertained is not what really matters. Okay? Does it make sense? I hope so. Okay, continuing on. It is better to hear the rebuke of a wise man than for a man to hear the song of senseless men. Yeah, that makes sense, right? It's better to hear the rebuke of a wise man than for a man to hear the song of a senseless man. For like a crackling of thorns under a pot, so is the laughter of a senseless man. This is also vanity. Oppression makes a learned man dizzy, and he destroys his vigorous heart. The end of matters is better than the beginning, and a patient man is better than one of a haughty spirit. Do not be hasty in your spirit to be angry, for anger rests in the bosom of senseless men. Do not say, why were the former days better than these? For you do not inquire wisely concerning this. Right? It is better to hear the rebuke of a wise man than to hear the song of a senseless man. Yes. The question is, how do we choose to receive the rebuke of a wise man? How we deal with someone's criticism or how they rebuke us tells a lot about who we are. Do we deal with it with humility? Do we deal with it with anger? Do we find ways to overcome what they did with better wisdom or different wisdom? Do we return volley, if you will? They'll say something mean, so we have to turn it around and say something mean about them. I might have to just leave that one there. But it is better to hear the rebuke of a wise man than for a man to hear the song of a senseless man. Like the crackling of thorns under a pot. How does that work? Crackling of thorns under a pot? Pots are heavy, made of impenetrable materials. The thorns will just crack under them and be of absolutely no value or point. So is the laughter of senseless men. This is vanity. Oppression makes a learned man dizzy and destroys his vigorous heart. The end of matters is better than their beginning. Very true. And a patient man is better than one who is haughty in spirit. Do not be hasty in your spirit to be angry. And I think, again, we're just so inclined to do that right now. I know I am. I hear something I don't like, I get mad. Anger rests in the bosom of a senseless man present. Do not say, why were the former days better than these? For you do not inquire wisely concerning this. I don't like people talking about the good old days. I'll be honest, because there were none. Okay? People say, oh, well, Father, there was the 70s. The 70s are great. Well, I remember the 70s. I lived in the 70s. I lived the whole 70s. And some of it was very good. The music was awesome. Well, some of it. Some of it was pretty lousy. There was an oil embargo. There was a constant threat of nuclear attack from the Soviet Union. There was always a possibility that, something else might happen. There was the whole Watergate thing. There are all sorts of different things you can point to. You could say, oh, well, the 50s were fine. The 50s were roar and everything was great. Well, it was post-war. It wasn't realistic because of the different things the government was doing to prop up local industries. You had black-only fountains and white-only fountains. And trust me, the black fountains were not as good as the white fountains. You could go on and on and on. The good old days weren't as good. We have rose-colored glasses when it comes to looking into the past. And so when we yearn to go back to the way that things were, we really don't see it with a clear vision. And that's why he says at the very end of that, very wisely, I might add, you do not inquire wisely concerning this. Because you just don't have a healthy perspective. You have nostalgia. Nostalgia is not healthy. Okay, you can go and reminisce about what was in the past, but nostalgia tends to overlook the things that were dark or wrong in those times, and in the future, we might miss certain things that happened in the 2000s and the 2010s, maybe even in the 2020s. We may long for days that were as simple as something, who knows? Okay, but at the end of the day, those things are still you just live these days. And these days are never better or never worse than any day that we've lived before. For everything that we're going through right now, there is still tremendous opportunity to do really, really, really good things, right? And so even now, we have opportunities to do things that make us spiritually healthy, that make us better citizens in this country, that help us help our neighbors. There are all sorts of potential things that we can do. We just have to do them, right? And not so inclined to pursue vain things. Wisdom is good with an inheritance and profitable to those who see the sun. For wisdom in its shadow is the shadow of silver, but the abundance of knowledge of wisdom will give life to him who has it. Remember, wisdom is the pursuit of good things that we see even in the book of Proverbs, right? We talk about Proverbs in the past and how there's building blocks according to certain church fathers, right? Behold the works of God. This is verse 13 of chapter 7. Behold the works of God, for who can put in order him whom God has made crooked? In the days of what is good, live in that goodness. In the day of trouble, consider also that God made one harmonious with the other, that a man may not find out anything that will come after him. There's always a balance that can be made. Now I want to go back and reread the beginning of chapter 3, okay? And I want to ponder that in conjunction with what I just read, okay? I'm going to say that again, and then I'll go back. Behold the works of God, for who put in order him whom God has made crooked? In the day of what is good, live in that goodness. But in the day of trouble, consider also that God made one harmonious with the other, that a man may not find out anything that will come after him. And that's true. How many of us think back a year ago, and how many of us thought that we would ever live through something like we're living through now? God doesn't give us that kind of opportunity, okay? Now I want to reread again chapter 3, the beginning of it. Again, it's that bird song. But to everything there is a season and a time for every matter under heaven, a time to give birth and a time to die, a time to plant and a time to pluck what is planted, a time to kill and a time to heal, and a time to pull down and a time to build up, a time to weep and a time to laugh, a time to mourn and a time to dance, a time to throw stones and a time to gather stones, a time to embrace and a time to refrain from embracing. That's so profound. A time to seek and a time to lose, a time to keep and a time to throw away, a time to tear and a time to sow, a time to keep silent and a time to speak, a time to love and a time to hate, a time of war and a time of peace. So within that context of the things that come, the good things and the bad things, and a time to deal with the things that we like and a time to deal with the things that we don't like. We were all born. We're all going to die. And there's an appropriate time for each of those things. There is a time to throw seeds into the ground so that they may sprout. And at the end of the season, there's a time to revisit those plants and to harvest the fruit that they have borne in that time. There is a time to kill, and there is a time to heal, a time to pull down, and there is a time to build up. There is always something. And so all of these things have their sequence. All of these things have their place. And so none of them should bring us to be distraught. None of them should bring us to despair, because each has its appointed time. And so when those things come, we know that they are coming according to God's will in their due season. It's such a powerful and important message that we are hearing here, okay? That it's not always a time of happiness and laughter, but it's also not always a time of sadness and mourning. It is not always a time of keeping away from each other, but is also not always a time to be together. It is not a time for us to throw away everything, but at the same time, it is, there's also opportunities, to throw away, to keep or to throw away. There's always a time to tear or to split or to rend, and a time to sow and mend and bring back together. There is a time to be silent. There is a time to speak. And indeed, there is a time to love, and there is a time to hate. Well, what would be a time to hate? A time to hate would be a time, when we see something good being spoiled. Time to hate is when we see injustice of some sort. We see somebody mocked because of their beliefs, or see somebody beaten because they're not the same skin color as us, or, any number of things. There are times to hate those things, right? Do we hate the person? No. Do we hate what they do? Yeah, we can. And so these are the things. Every season has all of these things come. And so in order to develop a healthy sense of things, to develop a spirit of these things, it's important to remember that joy and suffering come together. Okay? They are one. Now in heaven, the suffering will melt away and will be obliterated, and all that will be left is just joy. But suffering in this world is intrinsic. We were born in suffering, the travail of the mother, and also, babies cry when they're born because it's a new and weird experience for them. And so there is always that kind of balance between the good and the bad. And it's important for us to realize that each comes in its turn. And that helps us, I think, to address the more difficult things and to embrace the good things. Spiritually, the monks talk about living life as a flat line, okay? So we're never too joyful and we're never too sad. We're never to the point where we think that nothing bad will ever happen again, and we're never to a point where we think that the sun will never rise again. Always keep things in this nice level perspective. And that's exactly what Solomon is saying here in Ecclesiastes. He is saying that each comes in its measure. And our response to those things needs to be done in a way that keeps us healthy and calm. Okay? When bad things happen, we should never, ever give up hope. We should never doubt to the point where we get into despair. We should never feel that those things are going to overcome the things that are good. But when the good things come, we should also not take them for granted. We shouldn't say, oh, well, there will never be a bad day, so I might as well just, this is boring, who cares? we must have an equal measure of perspective here, okay? That the joy shouldn't be so much joy that we get despondent when something happens that we don't like, okay? But at the same time, we shouldn't give in to the sadness of things and to the downside of things to the point where we think that joy will never come again. And so, again, to claim to know what Koheleth is saying here, I think it's important for us to keep a balance of perspective, that joy and sadness are partners. They come hand in hand. And so it's important for us spiritually to be prepared for both. All right, so we are in the middle of chapter 7. I think it's a good place to stop. If you do have any final questions that you want to ask, please feel free. You can text me or you can send. We need to find a balance between good and bad things. They always fluctuate. That is exactly right, and they do. They indeed do. Yep, thank you, John. All right, well, I thank you, everybody, for your time tonight. Hopefully, this game, gives you some kind of insight. It's a spiritually deep book. It's no question. It's a spiritually deep book. But I think if we read it carefully, and if we read it and sort of apprehend some of the things they're trying to say, I think it equips us very well to be able to handle dire situations. Honestly, I don't think this is as dire as some others could be, but it certainly gives us the opportunity to deal with things a little bit more clearly and without so much anxiety or apprehension about the things that are taking place. So thank you very much for your time. I appreciate you being with me tonight. May God bless you and keep you. We will meet again for a live stream on Thursday at 7 o'clock, and we will talk about Vespers. We'll take a look again at this coming week's Vesper service. Marilyn, you're welcome. God bless you too. And thank you, Lori. God bless you. So everybody, have a good night. In the name of the Father, Son, and Holy Spirit, one God, amen. Thank you very much for spending an hour with me. Christ is risen. We'll see you soon.